This video is going to show you Solar Flawless goes to the Deep Dungeon during the latter end of this season on a Titan. Just getting the feel for the dungeon, what it feels like now. It's the dust has settled with it, so I figured I would do a run. We're on Solar Titan. This is without the use of Mini Hammer, which I explain in the run why it's without the use of Mini Hammer, right? The builds on the screen are the builds that we're going to use for the entire dungeon. So there's build 1 and 2. That's survivability and DPS for build 1 for boss 1. For boss 2, there's loadout 3 and 4, which is going to be survivability and DPS. There's technically a 5th build for the ritual encounter, but that's literally just build 1 with Xenophage on. And literally we're going to edit the video, crop it up a little bit. This was Solar Flawless, by the way, so I didn't edit deaths out or something like that. I just edited out the deep dive sections, the jumping sections. You aren't learning much from that, and sped up the ritual encounter, right? Just because you're not going to learn from that. I know that you're going to skip to the first boss. I know you're skipping to it now. So what's the point in me like really optimizing the entire 1 hour 20-minute video? There isn't. What you need to realize with like Solar Flawless videos that are like an hour, or Solar GMs, the average watch time for something like that is only 10 minutes. But yet I've done an hour's work. But yet it's only 10 minutes. And this is right, same for right across the board. Whoever it is, Datto, it doesn't matter who it is. It's the same deal. Mine's actually higher because I had that extra commentary. So I'm actually on the better end than most. So that's why, as I say, I've chopped it up a little bit. But this was in fact Solar Flawless. I'm not going to really provide any tips for the ritual encounter. It's straightforward. Just use whatever build that you were using anyways for your first build, which is probably going to be an ability spam build anyways. So that's just the information for the start. I'll provide commentary for the first boss and the second boss also. So with the first boss, make sure before you rally that you have double reserves on for whatever rocket that you're using. If you're doing the bipod trick, so if you have a bipod rocket and you have that with double reserves, you get 14 rockets. You get even more with a field prep bipod rocket. So there's that. The Osprey or whatever, the new rocket launch, well, not new but reprised rocket. But if you're doing that, double reserve a plate, a separate one, then rally. You then get your 14 rockets or your 17 rockets, whatever you're doing. This is good because it means you don't have to use Lament. Lament's good and all for the survivability, and let's be honest, it is. And its damage is also good, but this boss is really tanky. So I recommend that you use Legend of Acrius. Now I know it's a raid weapon, and I have this rule, or sort of a rule. If you don't know, then I'll tell you it now. I try to use weapons that are easy to get and obtainable to most in videos. Because what is the point of me using a raid weapon if you don't have the raid weapon to begin with? If it's a raid weapon with that shows a lot of power to the point that it's best in slot by a mile, I won't use it. Right? However, there's the kiosk, and you can pick up weapons from the kiosk, like Anarchy and stuff like that. So, I highly recommend to anybody, you should be picking up Acrius if you haven't got it. Right? It should be picked up automatic, because it's a fantastic weapon with the changes. So, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be swapping to Acrius. Now, my strat has changed since the dungeon first came out. I used to get 2 symbols, then 1. I don't need to do that, of course. That was just because back then. So obviously we've got 3 symbols, so there's 3 wizards, right? So when you get your 3 symbols down below, you get 3 wizards, crush the ghost for each, you get then Vestige of Light times 3. When you do this though, bear in mind you need to do your management of the room. I haven't really talked about much my build. Now my build's unique because I don't see many people doing Solar Titan like this. So, I would have to go on Reddit, but I can't honestly be bothered to go on Reddit. But basically, when you have Roaring Flames up as a stack, right, your uncharged melee is counted as a charge melee. Which means you don't need to do the mini hammer thing. But first I'll just explain the DPS here, and I'll get back to that. So, when I get the shoulder charge there, I get the one-shot kill on the knight. That's because I had Roaring Flames plus Symphoceps procced, so I left a couple of ads alive to one-shot that knight. Then I do the Arbalest, one-shot, right? Then I pop super. Then whilst I'm in my super, I switch to build 2. I'll explain that again for phase 2 of damage, because that's a lot of information at once. My damage rotation for Acrius is 6 shots, so melee in between 3 each time, because you get trench barrel times 3, right? So I literally hit him with 13 shots. If he can get one more shot, actually got 14, well 13 shots there. So it's 6 shots each with trench barrel procced, and then an extra shot if I can, right? And that's literally our damage rotation with the Arbalest trick. So I switch off my kinetic shotgun. So I've got a kinetic shotgun here with 1-2 punch. Fantastic shotgun. It's not even the crafted version. I mean, it's that good. I don't even need to craft it. Slide shot, 1-2 punch. And literally going back to the melee. So you add stacks of Scorch to an enemy. I don't know how many stacks it is, because at one time it never worked, but it does now. It has for a bit. This means that when you proc a healing grenade and use Ember of Empyrean, which extends solar, that when you get a solar kill, it extends restoration. This means it's unlimited restoration with punching, not with the mini hammer, just punching. Which means this is good news for console players. It means you don't have to use the mini hammer on console, because we know how annoying it is. You've got to change your bindings, and obviously I have done that in the past. I've ran the mini hammer to death. I've ran it as much as anyone. But like I say, I sort of get fed up of the mini hammer, and the hit detection of the mini hammer seems different now. And I thought, what the hell, let's do a full run without the mini hammer. because we all know how broken it is. Like literally, you could solo 4-phase this boss with the mini hammer alone, with tractor cannon and a shotgun and stuff. I think it's a problem in the game, right? So he's Arc Hunter. Doesn't mean to say I'm not going to run Arc Hunter with Assassin's Call, because I certainly am going to still run it. But I'm just saying that those builds, those two in particular, start to become too OP, and they're starting to Bungie's developing dungeons round the Void 3.0 subclasses. Why not, right? But the only problem with that is some of the 3.0 subclasses are lacking compared to some of the others, and they have strengths and weaknesses depending on what you run. This is a problem. It started with duality. Duality was balanced around you having lots of abilities. It's not balanced around guns anymore. The game isn't balanced around you killing enemies with guns anymore. It's balanced around what nade you have, what melee ability you have. And I think that the line's starting to get crossed now with the way abilities are. I know Strand as well. I mean, you can infinitely suspend targets. That's fun for the start, but like, what are we even playing anymore? Are we playing a first-person shooter anymore? Right? Like, I actually sort of missed Manannan and Better Devils and using that to kill enemies. This is going to be a very unpopular opinion, but I'm not saying double primary should be back. Obviously, you can run double primary. I just want my guns to kill enemies efficiently. Like good guns, end-game guns. Right? A legendary primary in GMs is rubbish compared to an exotic primary. See, they addressed one problem with exotic primaries not being used to the point where now legendary primaries aren't being used, or not used that often. And that's my issue with the game. With the gun ability split. I'm not a fan of it, but they're designing content around that idea of you having a souped up build, which means, guess what, you're always going to have to run a souped up build for every dungeon they release. Every new dungeon, it's going to have to be that you put on the best of the best stuff, and you can't run your Void Titan or something, right, or whatever it might be. You can see the damage here that we're putting out with Acrius, right? That's after 2 phases of damage, right? 2 phases. So you can solo 3 phase on this build if you're perfect and a little better than me. You certainly would with the mini hammer, but obviously I've said the reasons why I'm not using it to change things up and whatnot. The only thing with this is you've got to wind up the build. What I would sort of think of it as being. You must start off with at least a hammer strike to get the ball rolling for Roaring Flames. Once you do this, you can then just punch all enemies and you'll create sunspots on every ad kill. It means you know that whole weakness, Achilles heel of the mini hammer where you lose it. This build doesn't suffer from that. It doesn't suffer from that at all, and it's so good and satisfying to use in this dungeon. When I first thought of it, I was like, oh yeah, we don't even need the mini hammer really. You can still have infinite restoration. What more do I want? And I don't need to use the stupid hammer. This is so good. So I'm like, yes, I need to do this dungeon with this setup, and that's why I did. But you need some mods in your build to complement it. So double outreach on the class piece, which means when you use your class ability, you get melee energy. That's a backup. Invigoration or whatever it is, where you pick up orbs, or yeah, I think it's invigoration, where you pick up orbs and you get melee energy. I've got heavy-handed on, so even if it's an uncharged melee, I get an orb. Because it's not an uncharged melee. Technically, it's a charged melee that's adding scorched to enemies. So you're getting your hammer strike back really quick. But you only need 1 hammer strike per chain of enemies, if you like, that you're going to kill. So it's really good. Downstairs in the water section, just make sure your pattern's good. Like if you're going for 3 symbols, just make sure your pattern's good. Just keep repeat what I do with the symbols. When I've got the 3 symbols in my mind, I just keep repeating them over and over to myself when I'm navigating around. Because there's enough to think about with this encounter at all, like in the first place. Last thing you want is forgetting it. So just keep repeating it over and over. But if the more you do the dungeon, the more that you remember the symbols and all that. right? The dungeon's been out quite a bit now, so if you have been playing since it came out, then I don't see that as being a problem for people. The Sentinel can sometimes kill you downstairs. It is something that can happen. Let's not like think about that. That is a possibility of death. That's why you need good routing, right? But yeah, also with your hammer strike, see what I'm doing as well, I'm farming up hammer strikes for every wizard, or most of the time at least anyways, because it almost one-shots them. Right? And it extends my survivability, it extends everything. I'm basically unkillable. Make sure though, when you do set up a sunspot, right before damage, you swap to Arbalest. Don't swap your build, swap to Arbalest, to swap off. That's why I've got a legendary shotgun on, right? Keep extending your buffs, your roaring flames and whatnot, but keep some of the ads alive. When you dunk the foul vestige, go for immediately for the knight. It one-shots the knight, very satisfying. Then immediately use Arbalest and then pop super, because you're going to be weak from the sentinel, chances. Then swap to build 2, keep your super going, right? The reason why I'm staying alive here, if you don't know, is because there's a sunspot attached to the boss. So the closer I stand at the boss, the better, because I'm actually getting health. And then we're just going to do our damage rotation that we done from previously. So the 12 shots all with trench barrel, and then a 13 if we can. I could have optimized my damage a little bit, like we're so close as well. We're probably 2 Acrius shots off. So unlucky. I'm going to speed up the footage from here because it's basically repeated, because the boss has literally 5% HP. So the first 3 phases aren't going to be no different to the phase I ran here. Maybe just a little quicker because I was impatient when I get to the next boss. So yeah, that's literally how it's working. I'm using the unscorched, the uncharged ability to get stacks of charge, not stacks, stacks of scorch to enemies, providing they got roaring flames. That's what we're doing. We're not using the mini hammer. That's how it works. People probably don't even know that that's an actual thing, but it actually is. So like I said, I'll just speed up the footage for this, and then we've got the final boss to talk about, which obviously that's a little bit more in depth than what this encounter is. This encounter is fine. I feel as though this encounter is balanced. I mean, the boss still has quite a bit of HP. Like, I mean, you know, we're a few weeks into this season. You're not going to be out level it anyways. We're actually at max level for out leveling him anyways. I think it's 18. I think he's 1800, or he might be 1790. I'm not sure, but we can't get any more damage out like through leveling terms. So I still think this encounter is balanced fine because you can get to DPS quick enough, right? So it's not too much of a problem. I mean, even if you're 5 phase, which you can solo 5 phase with Lament easy, you can solo 4 phase with Lament if you're really good, but most of you are going to 5 phase with the Lament. But on solo Titan at least, well, on solo Warlock as well, Acrius is definitely the player. So this is now the final boss. So make sure you change your chest plate to whatever heavy you're using. So I've went from double stasis reserves to double void, because I'm not going to use a bipod rocket for this, because it's not needed, right? So I've been doing a lot of damage tests with this boss. I've used everything you can sort of think of, everything but not raid stuff, because obviously the Root of Nightmares raid stuff does huge damage, right, to the boss, which was out of the question to use for the video. So I've used everything: Sleeper Simulant, Xenophage, Warcliffe Coil, because Warcliffe Coil has some unique effects on certain bosses. Unfortunately on this boss it doesn't, which I was I think I tried 1000 Voices, that wasn't good. Like, so many. I know Leviathan's Breath. Now here's the thing with Leviathan's Breath: don't feed into the Leviathan's Breath. Leviathan's Breath ain't that good if you're on console. The reason why I say that is because it's bugged. Leviathan's Breath does more damage depending on how many frames that you have. We are capped on console to our frames. PC can go up with the frames, right? So they get more damage. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. If you're on PC, use Leviathan Breath, you get more damage. Console, no. And I feel it to be very sluggish for this fight, even with Archer's tempo. I just don't like Archer. I just don't like Leviathan Breath in this fight. I consider it as a more of a GM weapon for me. That's just how I look at it. So yeah, I tried everything, and I ultimately went with just rockets. You can actually solo 4-phase with this loadout. Just it didn't happen to. It just didn't happen on this day. I have actually solo 4-phased this fight with this exact loadout. But you need to be perfect, and no one's going to be perfect on a solo flawless. Generally not, especially when you're 40-30 minutes into a run. You start to get a little tired. It's an endurance run, this dungeon. So you can use Xenophage if you want, but I didn't want to do that either because it's boring. We've seen this. We've seen the whole Xenophage Actium Warwick thing. If you want to do that, it's really reliable. You can do it, and you can be quite mobile with your damage. But again, you've saw that footage. If you want to do that, then by all means on your build too, so on your DPS build, when you swap to it, just make sure that you've set that all up with Warwick Xenophage. But for me, I went with a Frenzy Rocket. My idea with this, it's just like with the Arc Titan. Probably you maybe didn't see it, but basically my idea is to use double special heavy with the rocket, right? But to clear enough adds so that for every DPS phase we can fire up to 12 to 14 rockets if we want. So 12 to 14 rockets of a Frenzy Rocket actually does so much damage. More damage than any sort of aggressive linear apart from Root of Nightmares. So it'll out DPS like you know, your general what do you call the arc aggressive frame? I forgot the name of it. All the aggressive frame linears won't be as good as this. That's if you get your damage right there. Sleeper, that was hitting for me 116k per crit. Only got 13 shots. Sleeper's alright, like Sleeper's good, but after testing and everything, I just thought I'll go with the rocket. But it didn't really matter anyways, because I'm still 5-phasing. This is a crazy dungeon. Like when I ran this dungeon on the Soul Force at 1820 in power, I thought, man, when I get to 1830 and outlevel this dungeon, my phases are gonna go up crazy. Didn't happen at all. I barely got much of a damage increase. Like the scaling on this dungeon's so weird. It's not like with Spire of the Watcher, like where, okay, so if I overlevel and duality, if I overlevel, I'll end up getting that much more damage. Not really. The difference between 1820 and 1830 for DPS isn't that much different. It doesn't scale up very well, and that's what's sort of disappointed me with this dungeon. I was hoping at 1830 that you could reliably solo 3-phase with pretty much any loadout, providing that you execute well, and that just isn't the case. So I'm a little I'm even using an Arbalest trick, right? Well, actually, yeah, I kind of am. I'm using the Arbalest one-shot trick to increase my DPS even further, and still, even like firing 13 rockets at him, it still ain't going to be nowhere near solo 3-phase territory. It's like this dungeon was made in mind with Root of Nightmares to have those weapons, and I don't think it's the right play. Introducing a set of raid weapons that give you this buff. I don't know. I know they're going to say, oh, well, that's incentivized to run the dungeon. Yeah, I know, but still, I don't think it's the right play doing that, because then you pigeonhole into those loadouts too heavily. Like Sleeper Simulant should be out DPSing a raid linear all day, and it isn't. And they said they wanted Sleeper to be like the king of linears, which is why they didn't hit Sleeper like they did the other linears. But no, it's not the king, because the raid linear is in this example at least. So yeah, we went with the Frenzy Rocket. An Explosive Light Rocket would work well, but bear in mind it's only going to proc on your 6 rockets. After that you lose damage bonus. Are you going to stockpile orbs on the ground? No. Like they run around, they fall down the map and stuff. So I don't actually recommend that. The Frenzy Rocket will be better, because if you can fire 13 rockets on a Frenzy with the Frenzy activated, that's just going to be better damage. Because that's 15% all the time, whereas Explosive Light is 25% some of the time, which is better. Depends if you could stockpile orbs. You could do. But I don't even have the roll to do what I wanted to do with it anyways, so I just stuck with this frenzy rocket. Better than Vorbul's. Vorbul's only 10%. So with this boss fight, we're just using what we used from build 1 on the first boss, right? Essentially with Sympaceps and being able to not have to throw a hammer, so our uncharge ability is going to provide us with the Empyrean, the Ember of Empyrean, to extend our restoration. Obviously using the invigoration, so when we create orbs we get melee energy, just in case, because they did nerf shoulder charge abilities in that if you can't use them as a movement tool as well, because what they done with them is when you use them they penalise you and you lose a tenth of energy. Why did they do that? It's such a dumb change. Is this for PvP? Because for PvE it's affecting PvE. Like, I should be able to spam my shoulder charge. I was watching footage the other day of a solo GM on Lightblade when I was on Arc Titan. I kept spamming my shoulder charge and I was like, oh, this is really good, but I can't do that now. Why? What? I haven't been keeping up to date with TWABs, I admit this, but why, like, change that for PvE? There was no need to do that. Is it to get us to use Thunderclap? Because I'm still not using it. Still not going to use Thunderclap. You know? So, yeah, they need to reverse that change. That's a bad change. That's the weakness of this build. Is that if you whiff a shoulder charge, then that could result in death. So this is DPS. So we immediately do a Arbalest plus Rocket. Now we need to extend our Radiant. So there's some Thralls spawn to our left. Right, so we've got our buffs going. We've got Treble, Void Surge, and Radiant. I'm just going to use all our rockets. What the error that I made? It's not really an error, but it is a little bit in my world. Is that I didn't check where all the heavy was, or if there was any heavy. So I ended up on this first DPS phase spamming a load of Arbalest, which I could have fired another 2-3 rockets easily. So this damage phase wasn't as good as it could have been. It also would have cost me the 4th phase. Like if I really had ambitions to solo 4th phase on this particular run, then that first phase would have had to been better, like far better. Like I'm talking about firing at least another 3 rockets. But what you need to understand is that at the start of the fight, the DPS phase is harder because you haven't had enough time to farm up the bricks. Now you can totally do that and wait for damage. Just keep killing the acolytes and have tons of bricks on the floor, and it won't take you long. 5 minutes of farming in here will net you a lot of heavy on the floor, and if you can get them all in the middle of the map, even better. I know the shoot to loot, but I didn't use shoot to loot. It's just as simple as that. I know someone's going to say the shoot loot. I didn't use it. But you can literally, in theory, just spam as many rockets, farm up as many rockets ammo as you need. So when you're defending the zones with the knights, you need to obviously be careful. Make sure that you for this setup that you've got a good uptime on your Roaring Flames. The time to be worried on this build is if you lose Roaring Flames entirely, you have no healing aid, and your Hammer Strike is on cooldown. If all those 3 things happen, you could be dead. And that's where you need to manage that, right? So that would be bad play if that happened to you. That could be partly your fault. It might not be your fault, and you might have whiffed a shoulder charge, right? Which isn't really your fault, so to speak. Sometimes the tracking on the shoulder charge is a little bit iffy, especially when you're on this hill. If you try and shoulder charge an acolyte and you run down the hill, it'll shoulder charge past the acolyte. It's just something that can happen. But if that happens, you've always got the water sections to quickly jump into. Manage the room properly. I've played this dungeon enough to know when there's a risk. Like, think about it. When I'm actively playing, I'm actively thinking in my mind what the risk percentage is, right? And it can quickly snowball on top of you. Like, the boss has hit me two, three times. I'm 70% HP. Okay. The risk of dying right now is like, it's rare that I would die after this. But if something else bad happens, I whiff a shoulder charge. Boom. I'm actually at risk now of dying. Right? I have no healing aid. I didn't realise. Right, now I'm in a risk of dying. That is because of me. If that's how it happened. Right? So you actively need to doing these risk checks as you're playing. But the quicker you play, the better it is. So Titan mains will get on with this really well. If you're not a Titan main, but you just start playing Titan, I don't think you're going to be that good at this. And I would recommend an Arc Hunter instead, which will be more powerful than this. An Arc Warlock will be more powerful than this. The thing about the Arc Warlock is, you get so much damage for free, it's crazy. When I mean for free, when you Arbalest the boss and then use your Chaos Reach with Geomax Stabilizers, it does 3 letters of damage. So you see they've got the Necromancer below the HP bar. So you'll do to the end or past before you've even done any heavy, which makes it so good. The Titan Hammer's really bad super for damage on this boss. That's why I didn't even use it. You actually lose damage using your super. You actually lose damage. Isn't that crazy? Because it takes too long to get it out, right? It takes so long to use your super because you're in a sunspot and stuff. You know, so obviously Arc Titan's better for DPS, but then there's the risk of missing your Thunder Crash, which there's actually a good risk of doing that, which is why I didn't do an Arc Titan solo flawless run, because the risk of getting everything to do everything perfect, like the odds of getting everything as I would want it, would be quite low. This is obviously going to be better for most on the solo, even though there is an Arc Titan build going around this season because of the artifact mods. So with my DPS, I'm sure most people know this, but if you don't, you can control where you do DPS from. The middle section in the chain section that we've just done already, where you stand and you kill the knights, you can always have middle if you want, which I highly recommend middle. Right? It's a zone that's always up. For example, Oryx's head's not always up, right up top, or his foot isn't always up, but middle is always up. This is on intention. This means that you've got some routine in your DPS. You've got routine in everything that you do. So if a symbol does come up and it's middle and it was the first champion, the first Hive Guardian that you went to see, prep the room. This is what I do. So I prep the room, I kill all acolytes. I do not kill the Hive Guardian, but I get him to a 3rd HP. Then I leave the room and then continue killing the rest of the Hive Guardians. Then when 2 symbols are dunked, I will clear the room entirely. I will then wait for another phase of acolytes. Then I will go and kill that final Hive Guardian to come back in this room to then kill another spawn of acolytes. Now why are we doing so much? That sounds like a lot of work, right? Well, it is. But it means that there's no ads alive when you do DPS. This is literally the safest way. Like if I was to literally do a strand Titan run, this is how I would have to do it. I would have to literally wait out the acolyte phase, kill acolyte, go and kill the last Hive Guardian, come back. Because they are on a 45 or 50 second rotation. Think around about that. So if you clear the room, right, and then you go and kill a Hive Guardian, as you kill the Hive Guardian, or just about when you come back in this room, a fresh wave of acolytes spawn up, kill them all, dunk your final symbol, you then can do DPS freely. You can freely do DPS. You need to learn that. If you don't, and you want to do it like where other people do it frantically, then you can do it like that. But I'm not a fan of doing it like that. Where you leave all acolytes up and you make a sunspot and then you... That wouldn't work for how I'm doing it with rockets, because there's a higher chance of rocketing yourself. If there's loads of acolytes up and they're throwing nades and all that sort of stuff, it ain't working. So I've adjusted the strategy to what I'm using, and sometimes you've got to... If I was using Xenophage, Acrius, the chest plate, sorry, Actium Warrig, then you can kind of just forget and you don't need to worry too much about the ads, which is why some of the fastest clears solo-wise are with that loadout, is because you can avoid everything. I'm not doing that. I'm actually not doing that at all. I'm not avoiding stuff. I am literally doing everything as it should. Textbook, each phase. The only mistakes I'm actually really doing in this run is DPS. But it always is the case with this dungeon because of how much HP the boss has. It's just the nature of it. But they've had a chance to look at it. They've done some fixes with the dungeon already with the patch, where if you use Witherhoard you could kill the boss and then get your loot. They patched that. But while they patched that, they could have looked at the boss's HP values, but they didn't. Why? Because they want it to be like this. They haven't outright said it anywhere, but they want this boss to have this amount of HP. They're not speccing it for solo players. Definitely not. They're speccing it for fire team now. The reason why I think their ideology has changed for dungeons, because if anyone watched the stream for Shattered Throne, right, where they done a play along for the dungeon, they explained in that dungeon that dungeons were made for solo player first, fire team second. This is 100%. That's so they said they want to have some mechanics, but they need the mechanics to be soloable so that it's favourable for solo players. That's still the case. Mechanics are still soloable, right? There's no instant wipe death things where you need 2 people or more. But I think when they found out that dungeons were a massive hit after Shattered Throne and Pit of Heresy, right? And then Prophecy, then we got dungeon keys. So then now dungeon keys are the main selling point for them because they don't just come with the season. Now you've got to buy them separately, right? So then I think when that happened, the ideology of a dungeon changed, where they just wanted it to be a cool experience and that they wanted it to be challenging, but they forgot that, oh wait, there's solo players that need to solo this. Oh, let's just leave the damage value as it is, the HP of the bosses. The reason why I say that is because it started with Grasp of Avarice. Grasp of Avarice, when it first came out, the bosses were tanky. Right? Spire the Watcher, when that came out, the bosses were tanky. Like, you were 5 phasing both bosses, 6 phasing both bosses, if you didn't have the right loadouts on this. Right? So, nothing new with this dungeon. It's the same deal. We are still doing a lot of phases on the bosses. Like I said before, the first boss is fine. I think the first boss is tuned well, because it's a short amount of time to get to DPS. So the HP of the boss is justified, I feel. The first boss feels good to play, not too bad. This boss feels really good to play, mechanically demanding. You've always got to think, all of that's fine. What's not fine is the boss's HP. Now that we've settled on the dungeon, I can honestly say to you, the HP of the boss is too high. Unless you have the Raid, Router, Nightmare weapons, and then things change. But maybe the dungeon's balanced around you having that. Who knows? Because you can solo 2-phase with crazy loadouts. You can. I've saw the Merciless strat, which is insane, but would take a high skill to pull off. And it's something that I'm not willing to learn at this minute. I might have a go with it at some point. But that's more of a Warlock strategy anyways with the Merciless, not so much Titan. So I think, yes, the ideology has changed a little bit, where they want the solo floors to be what it is now, an endurance test. Whereas I think the golden era of dungeons was Prophecy. Prophecy? Pit of Heresy even. Because Pit of Heresy, I know there was some bugs that launched with it, but Pit of Heresy, when it first came out, was like really good, honestly. And Shattered Throne, really good. Those dungeons are better than all the newer dungeons that we've had, I think. Duality, it's gotten better with age. But it does suffer with bugs. But it's gotten better with age. The DPS requirements for duality is not huge. I could go and run a duality now, not think about it. Solo 2-phase, both bosses. No problem. Right? Or maybe solo 2-phase first boss, solo 3-phase the final boss. Without thinking about it. Shattered Throne, solo 1-phase both bosses. No problem. Prophecy, solo 1-phase first boss, solo 2-phase Echo Kell. Without thinking. This dungeon completely different. You've got to really think. And even though we're working hard, we're using triple surges, we're using radiant, we're maximizing our damage as much as possible. It's still 5 phasing, 4 phasing at best. Like what? That shouldn't be. That is just not the rhythm. What it should be, the formula. I know that because I've run this. I've run dungeons a long time. Like, you know how many dungeons I've run? A lot. The formula for dungeons for DPS should be as follows. Solo 2 phase should be extremely optimized. Only the best players can pull off solo 2 phase. Solo 3 phase should be a well-rounded player who's worked hard to get that. A solo 4 phase should be the average player. Somebody who hasn't really optimized the damage, but they've done damage. Solo 5 phase, well, it's you, the player's fault. That's the rhythm or the cadence it should go. Now, I think they should standardize it with the boss for the HP. But I know that each boss is different on how it works, depending on the mechanics that come out with that boss. So I know it's difficult to tune all of that. But I think they've stopped, as I say, tuning bosses' HP for solo, and they've just whacked up the HP. And it's balanced now for a fire team. This is like a mini raid now, or when the new dungeons come out, they're more like a mini raid experience. Because remember, it goes raid, one season, dungeon the next, raid, dungeon. I'm not complaining about how many dungeons we're getting, because we're actually getting quite a lot. I'm just saying, the way they think about dungeons has changed since I last remember them saying about dungeons. The boss is just above half HP, so you can see how the first phase of damage is slightly affected. Like if I'd done a bit better damage on phase 1, I would have had him less than half HP, which then would warrant the 4 phase. So you can see that it is 4 phaseable, but like I say, don't worry too much if you're on a run or if you're on a solo flawless and you screw up a damage, because you might, because you're under pressure on that run, right? But don't worry about it, because just think of it like this. If you have to do 1 extra phase than what you've done, it means that you've cost yourself 8 minutes. Wow. End of the world. I've cost myself 8 minutes. That means I'm 8 minutes slower at uploading this video. Wow. That's what it is. You know, it's not really like a contest now of like how good your DPS can be. Like, that's how you should be thinking. It's just a case of getting the thing done. That's literally it. It's an endurance contest anyways. So just think of it as that. Don't think of it as, oh, my DPS was so bad, because that's how it is. It's all mind over matter. I know, because I've done this myself. You'll be on a run and you'll be like, oh man, my DPS just wasn't there on phase 1. It means I can't 4 phase. And while you're thinking that, you die randomly. What? Because you weren't paying attention to what was going on screen. You weren't paying attention. Did I have my Roar and Flame buff up? Is there, how many moths are up? Can I safely melee this acolyte without being killed by these moths? How much aggro is on me from the boss? What's my HP value now? Is it 90% or 70%? What's the risk value of right now the encounter that I'm going into? Once you start thinking about DPS while you're doing the mechanic portion of it, that's where you get your deaths. And I can 100% say that. That's where people lose out. That's where I've lost out. I've lost runs. I've lost a few runs because of that. Because I'm too invested in, I want my DPS good. I want my DPS good. Because that's how I run all the dungeons. Right, with prophecy and everything. Get all my buffs going. Get it all done right. But with this dungeon, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter anyways, because it's still 4 phases of damage, which is still a 30 to 40 minute boss fight. It's like, what? Doesn't matter then, does it? Just do the run and then be done with it. It's not flashy, but it is what it is. But having said all those things, I do think the dungeon mechanically is probably the best we've got. It's probably mechanically better than Prophecy, although Prophecy is better because, I'll tell you why Prophecy is better, because the final boss room is geniusly made, right? The mechanics they're straightforward enough for anyone to pick up, but the dungeon will punish you if you don't do it right. There's aggro on you continually. The longer you do the mechanics on that room, the easier it gets, because it frees up corners of the room, and then when you realise the ceiling is going to be your next time for the phase 2, that's incredible. And the DPS window is incredible because it ports you from one place to another, right? So it makes DPS feel so good. It's the best DPS window in Destiny ever, I think. The Prophecy Echo Kell fight. Because of just how it goes. I know if they start making all fights like that, it'll be boring, I know that, but it's adding some traversal now. You've got to jump, think about it. It's so good, and that's what makes Prophecy the best dungeon that we've ever had. It just hasn't had a master release. To be honest with you, the way they do master dungeons now, I don't want Prophecy to have a master difficulty. You know why? Because they'll just destroy the dungeon. It won't be fun to play. Because master dungeons aren't fun to play. They're just not. On DPS here, I was like, what's going on here? I wasn't standing in the circle. I don't know what that was. But I was standing directly middle. Like, that I've never seen. I've run this dungeon quite a lot. And the actual circle to stand in was in front of me rather than behind me, or where I usually stand. So it meant that when I used my Arbalest, it was in the end. So I was like, what have I done wrong here? So this actually screwed my DPS a little bit. But it does show you how good this Frenzy Rocket's doing. It's doing so good. Like, it's actually chunking. It's hitting for, I think, 180k per shot. Right? So it's actually doing really, really well. I've seen some Xenophage DPS phases worse than that. And they're going all out as well with war rigs. So it just goes to show, like, rockets on this fight, especially your tracking rocket, needs to be tracking. I haven't really mentioned that, but it must be tracking. This is a crafted one. There's the Stasis rocket from Season of the Haunted. I forget the name of it. I've got that one as crafted with Frenzy on as well. Well, you can go Frenzy or Chill Clip, but I believe Frenzy would be the better play because you get 15% bonus. For this fight, I don't know actually. Now I say that, I haven't tested Chill Clip on this boss, or Chill Clip Rocket. Maybe it is slightly better. I don't know though. Probably not. I've sped up the footage from here now because it's essentially what we've just done, right? This is obviously later on in the fight now, so I'm just rinsing and repeating everything. There's not really many more tips I can go over, really, to be honest with you. Ager's Scepter, I haven't talked about that too much. So the reason why I've got that on is because we realised early on a Trace Rifle is really good in this dungeon, in most dungeons, because Trace Rifles are pseudo-primaries. So they have a really good, healthy amount of ammo, but they also allow you to get more heavy ammo, because if you pair a Trace Rifle with a shotgun or a fusion rifle or whatever it might be, you're going to get more heavy. Try running Primary Special Heavy in this dungeon. Just do me a favour if you don't believe me. Run Primary Special Heavy. So run Riptide, Wrist Runner, Heavy. And just come back to me and say, how much heavy did you get? I bet you didn't get any heavy, barely. Right? Whereas with the double special heavy, you get so much more heavy, which makes the whole encounter more consistent. Because if you're wasting 10 minutes every phase just to farm up ammo, the whole run increases risk. Because the longer the run goes on, naturally, there's going to be more of a risk of you dying at some point. Because there are times when moths can kill you. So that one time where you think you're safe and you're not, and you die because you were farming up ammo. This one, I don't need to farm up ammo. You naturally, progressively get tons of heavy, and the later on in the fight, the easier it gets. And it's only because of one reason, because we're using double special heavy. The only reason why I'm using the Ager's Scepter is because, well, it's a fantastic trace rifle for number one. Number two, I don't have an exotic weapon on during the mechanic phase, so I may as well put some exotic on. So I'm like, what should I put on? Ager's Scepter. And I've used it in the past, and I think it's fantastic. Especially when you overclock it, you can melt the Hive Guardians. You'll lose a third of your super, but you gain it back because you've got hands-on on your helmet. So you'll get the super back anyways. In actual fact, there's no requirement for my super in this run. The super's job isn't for DPS. I've took that out of the equation because, as I said before, you actually lose DPS when you pop a solar hammers. Because you get 45 seconds to do DPS. when you pop your super, it takes so long, like 10 to 15 seconds to get that super out. So you've already wasted 15 seconds of damage. When all you could have just done it was break shield Arbalest, start using your heavy, whatever it might be. And that's better than doing the super. But, like I said, everything's highly curated in this video. So, this will only work if you do the Acolyte trick. If you don't do the Acolyte trick, the run will be far harder than what it should be. So just take note of the Acolyte manipulation that I've done. And then you'll be able to do this run. Once you follow all the rules of the run, then you can do it, no problem. If you leave a rule of mine out, and then just copy half of my build and then not use all my strategies, no, you're not doing it properly, and you might end up dying as a result. And that wouldn't be my fault. It's just because you haven't listened to the entire video and the advices. So we're on near the end phases. We've missed a couple of rockets on this phase. I ended up being too cocky, thinking I'd be fine. But you do naturally sometimes, to be honest, miss a rocket or two. Also, be careful not to rocket yourself. That is a big thing. Like, if you have Thrall on you, that's fine. You kind of want the Thrall because you want Radiant. You want the upkeep of your Radiant. But don't just stand there and rocket then. Jump up. Like, if there's a Thrall that's burning in your sunspot, that's fine. But make sure you make the effort to jump up. Also, you notice the boss is getting debuffed. People might know, but this particular rocket actually debuffs enemies. Very similar to how you overload enemies and lower their output damage. This rocket actually lowers the output damage of the boss, making it a top contender, better than what people think. Hothead doesn't have this debuff mechanic because it's got what, stunning recovery, which has no role. I've said this in the past, but why can't we change origin perks on guns? I know that that's probably the identity of the gun, but that doesn't still make sense for me and what I want. And what I would like is full customization with the crafting. Being able to interchange perks that you've unlocked, you need to pay a material price for, and being able to change origin perks. Just let me own an origin perk as a mod. Like, it all needs throughout and started again. Well, we need a new game at this point. I know this, but I just think it's counterproductive. It's not for the player, this crafting system. It's here to make you play longer. Going for the red weapons, and then once you unlock that perk, if you switch off the perk, you've got to pay for it again. Or you've got to use your materials again, whatever. It's all against the player. It's not for the player crafting. And I realised it myself when I was playing one day, and I was like, this season all I've done is chased reds and leveled them up. Why? That shouldn't be a thing. So not only is it too grindy, the crafting, it's not even for the player. It's for their numbers, to get their numbers higher. Especially when the game is suffering like it is right now. Anything to keep the player numbers higher. Like, crafting should be something that you should be able to change scopes on the gun. Have you not seen any other game where they do weapon customization? You can change scopes on the gun, barrels on the gun, grips on the gun. Imagine you could do that. It would change the stability perk. The customizable options would be so huge. And by the way, there are scopes in the game that come on different guns, right? They have the models for all the scopes. So, for example, this scope I've got on Cartesian Coordinate is the Bad Juju scope. Look at it. It is the Bad Juju scope. Why is Bad Juju's scope on Cartesian Coordinate? I ask you the question. Why isn't crafting allowed me to change whatever scope I want on any gun? Obviously, don't be ridiculous and put a sniper scope on a shotgun. No. But yeah, but put like a long range barrel or scope on a pulse rifle. Yeah, let me do that. Instead of just having the barrel options that just change the perks, have a scope on that changes perks and the feel of the gun as well. But that's sort of my take on the crafting thing. It's not a perfect system. Like I say, I think we were better off without it than we are with it. I know that's a bad thing to say, but I honestly do think that at times, because when they added red border weapons, they say that's content. Well, it's not. It's not content, though, is it? That's just a gun that you've given me, allow me to craft. That isn't content. I can't use that as content. I use that gun to play content with. That's a huge difference. We're literally at the end of the fight. Um, really struggling. What else I can really tell you? Like I say, it's a longish video. If you want to try other DPS options, like I say, you can do the linear route. It doesn't matter really, does it? Because you're still going to 5-phase anyways, no matter what. At that point, if it's a 4-phase is a rare occurrence for you, and the 5-phase is most probable cause, then just go with whatever's easy to you. If you want to do the rocket strat like me, do the rocket strat. If you want to do Xenophage, do that. If you want to do sleeper, do that. It's up to you, really. It doesn't really matter in the end. That was the solo falls for the Titan. Hope you enjoy. Thank you.